The last thing I want to mention before we kind of fully get started is you might notice that I'm not wearing gloves. I mentioned this in my talk last month, but when you're handling very delicate, thin material like paper, oftentimes it's better to not wear gloves, just to go in with clean hands, because paper, you want to be able to feel. You really lose that tactile quality when you're wearing gloves, and it makes it much easier to accidentally tear pages. So I washed my hands right before this talk. And so again, if you're wondering, like, why isn't she wearing gloves when she's touching collections objects? That's why. So I had mentioned this in the email to all members, but we have over 80 scrapbooks in our collection. There are 81 in our scrapbook inventory. What I mean by that is, I'm going to share my screen really quick. So on our website, we have a page for our library and archives. And if you scroll down, we have some of our finding aids and inventories at the bottom. And one is called Scrapbook Collection. So this inventory was created by an intern, Anne-Marie Quinn, in 2013. So when I say we have 81 scrapbooks in our inventory, this is what I'm referring to. So it kind of has a list of all of our scrapbooks, their call numbers in the collection, the years that they were created, and it's a good overview, but we have even more than this. We have a number of scrapbooks that are not included in this inventory, at least 5 that I'm aware of, but I have come across even more references to scrapbooks. And so it honestly wouldn't surprise me if we have closer to 100 in our collection. And it's really cool. They come in so many different formats and cover a variety of content. And so, as I said, I'm just going to jump right into this. So our most well-known scrapbook is the Louis Baus scrapbook, and it is in this nice case. Unfortunately, all the text is going to be backwards because of the way that Zoom functions, but you can get the general idea. So it's in this case, and Louis Baus was a staff photographer for the Plain Dealer. This book was, I'm actually going to stand up for some of these. So this book was compiled in 1931, but most of the photographs, well, actually all of them, were taken in the 1890s. And so they're photographs of the North Union Shaker community, Warrensville Township, and the Mormon community in Kirtland, Ohio. I personally think this is really cool because I grew up outside of Kirtland. I've driven through Kirtland many times. So it's a cool connection to where I used to live and where I live now. And it's a great historical resource. So I'm actually, instead of handling the object too much because of how important this book is, the great thing about this scrapbook is that it has been digitized. So I'm going to share my screen again and pull this up for you. If I can find the tab. Here it is. So this book has been fully digitized. It was a partnership between the Historical Society, the Shaker Heights Public Library, and Cleveland State University, who hosts it on Cleveland Memory. But the reason that this book is invaluable for our collection and just for historical research in general is that it includes so many photos. Here, let's actually find a photo. So it includes so many photos of structures that no longer exist. Because you might have noticed when you drive around Shaker Heights, you don't see any Shaker structures. They were all destroyed. And this scrapbook is really one of the best documentations that we have for how everything used to look. But on top of that, not only does it have photos, but what every historian loves is that it has captions and historical background, which is fabulous. So not only do we just get a photo, but we also know, like this, for example, is a view of the Center family from the woolen mill. So it's just, it's amazing. It's an amazing record. I'm assuming that's why it was digitized, because it really is unique and, you know, a very complete resource. It includes maps. As I said, kind of towards the end of the scrapbook, it includes photos from the Mormon community in Kirtland, excuse me. But I will include a link to this digitized version in the email, so you can peruse it as you wish. But as I said, this is probably our most well-known scrapbook, just because of the wealth of information it contains, both visual and just historical information. So I'm going to set that aside. But we have a number of scrapbooks that do deal with the Shakers and Shaker Heights, the development of it as a city. One of the other topics that we have a lot of scrapbooks on are the Van Swearingen brothers. Stop sharing my screen right now. So as I'm sure many of you know, the Van Swearingen brothers helped develop Shaker Heights as a city. And so of course they're a big topic in our scrapbooks, but we have two of these actually, these bright green scrapbooks that are more of your traditional, I can actually turn my screen a little, more of your traditional photo album. So as I said, our scrapbooks come in a variety of formats. So this is kind of when you think of the old school self-adhesive photo albums that are not preservation friendly. You can see them yellowing around the edges, but this is actually just full of clippings related to the Van Swearingen brothers. As I said, unfortunately, the text is all backwards on the screen, but I think it's interesting kind of switching from the Baus scrapbook to this one that is, as I said, entirely newspaper clippings. And you can see newspaper does not last long, so it's kind of deteriorating in some of these pages. And unfortunately, most of our scrapbooks are not digitized. That's one of the reasons the Baus scrapbook is kind of unique in our collection, is the fact that it has been digitized and can be searched by anyone. So as I said, we have a lot on the Van Swearingen brothers and kind of their development of Shaker Heights as a city, a lot of newspaper clippings in those scrapbooks, because of course they were written about quite often in the newspapers. Another Van Swearingen scrapbook. This one's interesting because, so when it was cataloged, it was considered a Van Swearingen scrapbook, but it actually is a nomination. You can see this binder was compiled by former executive director Kathy Winans and former public relations coordinator Maxine Jackman in 1994. And it was when they finished, at the time, the new Van Swearingen exhibit on the first floor. It has since moved to another room, but they were submitting the exhibit for an award. And so it's interesting because, again, just a completely different format. This is more just resources that have been slid into clear pages or page holders, but there's a variety of photographs of the materials that they included in the exhibits, along with some scanned letters or transcripts of the letters. But what I think is really interesting is that there are photographs of what the exhibit had looked like. And so this is really great for our institutional archives and institutional memory, because I was very young when this exhibit was around. I never saw this exhibit. I would have had no idea what it looked like at the time, because as I said, it has since moved to a different room and is no longer in the same format. So even though this is kind of considered a Van Swearingen scrapbook, I very much also consider it a Shaker Historical Society scrapbook in terms of content and the institutional memory that it contains. And it's, as I said, it's just really interesting to me to kind of see how the exhibit looked. And I unfortunately do not know if we received the award for this, but it's just a cool way to kind of connect, again, what we what we share, the history that we collect related to the Van Swearingen brothers with what we do as an organization, and how this scrapbook kind of ties into both of those topics. And moving on with that idea of institutional memory and institutional archive, I don't know if you're familiar with the name Richard Cliver, but he was a Shaker Heights teacher and past president of the Shaker Historical Society, and was involved for a number of years. He also wrote some books on the North Union Shakers. But he had compiled, you can see this very thick book. He compiled a couple of these. There's a nice photo of the Historical Society. And they have to do with the history of SHS. And you can see on the title page, it says the first 30 years, 1947 to 1977. And this book is, I mean, it's great. It has a mixture of everything. It's a number of typewritten pages, but it also has some photographs in it. And again, it's nice to have a written record of the organization's history from someone who was involved for so long. So one of the things that I think is cool, kind of lending more to that scrapbook vibe, is this is actually an old meeting program from 1954. And so there are a couple of things like these that are kind of pasted throughout the book. So it's not just text. There's also kind of some ephemera, things that most people might have just thrown away, but now we have that record in this book. And we actually have a couple copies of these. And like I said, they're really thick books. You might be able to see that the binding is really tight. It's kind of hard to open. So this makes it much more difficult to digitize and to kind of show you photos. But this one I think is cool. So that bottom photo there, and as I said, I will include photos of all of these in the email, because I understand it's kind of hard to see sometimes with the glare, but this bottom photo is what our Shaker exhibit used to look like downstairs, which has now become our temporary exhibit space. But I just love this book for the wealth of information that it has on the society, because the reality is, even though we deal with the history of the Shakers and Shaker Heights, we also have to deal with our own history as an organization. So this kind of really helps us keep the record straight. And we mentioned in the email when we sent out information about this talk, how we use these scrapbooks in our historical research and in our exhibits. So a great example is when Hazel, our junior board member, who curated our current exhibit, Shaker's Attic, when she was researching for that, she referred to this book a lot, just kind of trying to get some facts and straight about our history, in particular about the history of when the house was donated to us. So for example, I think this is really interesting. I knew that the house had been donated to the Historical Society by Frank Myers in 1969. What I did not know was that we had actually, as an organization, kind of been hopping from location to location since our founding. And we had reached a point where we were losing our lease, and we didn't have a backup plan, we didn't have a place lined up to go. And we were so desperate that they had actually talked about dissolving the Historical Society. And Frank Myers stepped in to donate his house, which is still our home. I'm here now at the museum. But it makes the story so much richer when you realize really what was at stake. SHS might not exist nowadays if we hadn't received the house to store our collections and to work from as a permanent space. So I just think that these scrapbooks, as I said, really enrich our exhibits and our historical research and what we know of the organization and the city of Shaker Heights. And this book is old, so you might be able to see there's some some stuff from the binding falling out, but otherwise it's pretty well taken care of, or pretty well cared for. And another example of using these scrapbooks in our exhibits is that we have a number of scrapbooks about the Clark Freeway fight. So this one, you can see it is full of papers. It's a little harder to hold up because everything is loose, but you can see like here is protest against the Clark Freeway. I'll actually share my screen for this one. But when I first started, the first exhibit that I had worked on was It Takes a Village, which featured the Village Garden Club, who maintains the cherry tree grove at Horseshoe Lake. And the women of the Village Garden Club played a huge role in the fight against the freeway. And they wanted to highlight that in the exhibit, but their personal organizational collections did not really have a lot related to the freeway fight. So I was able to use material from our scrapbooks to kind of fill in those gaps and tell that part of the story. So even though the physical exhibit is no longer up, the digital exhibit is still available on our website. And the section 2-Bit Duck Pond kind of goes into the history of the freeway fight, which led to the creation of the Nature Center at Shaker Lakes. And I was able to use these materials. I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, every one of these documents is from the Historical Society's collection. And I know that these have been used throughout the years for exhibitions and talks given by the Historical Society or the Nature Center. I believe the Friends of Lower Lake have also used some material, but in general, it's a great resource. A lot of this stuff was compiled, as I mentioned, by the Historical Society because we were heavily involved in the fight. Frank Myers was involved. Elizabeth Nord, who our library is named after, was also heavily involved and saved everything, which is really great for us. But another example of how these scrapbooks really help us enrich the exhibits and the stories we tell, and help us better understand our history. Again, this link is available on our website if you want to take a look at it once this talk is done. Let's set this aside. So that's kind of an overview of some of the scrapbooks that, as I said, we've used to get a better understanding of our history, of the history of Shaker Heights, and how we've used it in exhibits. So I'm kind of now just going to get into like the fun part, just the scrapbooks that I find interesting and that I like. Maybe we haven't used them in exhibits yet, but I still think that they're worth talking about. We have so many that this is just a fraction of them, but I think that they're really cool. So this binder, again, a lot of these scrapbooks are huge. And so this is the Ralph Russell Book of Remembrance. So Ralph Russell was the founder of the North Union Shakers. The Russell family had purchased land in the Connecticut Western Reserve and ended up using the land to build the colony. But I think that this particular scrapbook, let's see if I can turn it, it's quite heavy. It's interesting because it's essentially kind of an archive in scrapbook form. So it has a lot of original documents that are in these pockets, or sometimes in sleeves. Like this one, for example, is in a plastic sleeve. But these are all original documents, which is really cool. I'm glad that they weren't glued in, so we can theoretically scan them and make sure that they're well preserved. But this was compiled by the Historical Society in remembrance of Ralph Russell. So here's, I don't know if you can see a photo of some graves. It's sideways. I'm not going to try to turn it right now. Here's another original letter document. You can see how much it's aged and kind of stained. But I think that there's a real, I'm very grateful that our founders of the organization and Elizabeth Nord in particular really spent so much time putting these together to maintain that historical record. And Yeah, and I think that you know, we're better off because we have all of these scrapbooks that were compiled by people connected to the organization who, you know, nowadays, like, it's possible some of that stuff would have been thrown out, depending on if they thought it was worth saving. And I said already that Elizabeth Nord saved everything, because you never know what you might need in the future in terms of ephemera, like a booklet that you might normally throw out that actually comes in handy nowadays. And a lot of the scrapbooks that I've shown you so far are either kind of heavy on text, you know, documents, documentation. Some of them have photos. We do have a couple of scrapbooks that are entirely photos. So I'm going to pull out two right now. So this one, it's kind of just like a standard binder, but it's called North Union Pictures from Frank A. Myers and Richard K. Tappenden, Shaker Heights Then and Now. So these are photographs that they're reproductions. Oh, it's closing on me. Reproductions from glass plate negatives that were in people's collections. So you can see a number of them. They tend to have to do with Shaker Heights and the Shakers. Some of them have writing on the back of them and captions. There are a couple over here, like here's I know it can be hard to see with the glare, but that's the Shaker Woolen Mill. My favorite photo in this album is this one. There is no context, but I just love coming across animals and old photographs. So just some 3 dogs sitting on a porch. Again, these were all reproductions from glass plate negatives. So it is quite old, but the only mention on the back is what collection it came from. It doesn't say anything about who the dogs belong to, but I just think it's fun seeing animals and old photographs. Seeing people's pets, can relate to that. And then this tinier, but still very thick album is comprised of photos of the rapid transit and terminal tower construction. And a lot of these photos get kind of, not technical, but you know, it's just over time seeing the construction of the rail and terminal tower, which is really cool. But I think I mentioned this in my last talk, but I have a background in photography. And so I'm very much drawn to just kind of what I consider to be nice photographs as well, regardless of whether they're maybe as useful as other photographs. But this one in particular, I just think is a beautiful photograph. And you can see like the old cars, terminal tower in the center. I love that photograph. Let's see, I have a couple of more marked in here. This one on over here, I think is really interesting because of how different the skyline looks at that time. So you can see terminal tower kind of poking up. And nowadays you can, you know, terminal tower is surrounded by a number of skyscrapers. So it's just very interesting to me. And then this last photo is the banquet celebrating the opening. So those are all people there to celebrate the opening in, let's see, June of 1930, opening banquet. So this is one of the few photos that does have a caption. Most of them do not. But as I said, this is pretty much entirely photographs. Some of them are, they actually kind of taped 2 photographs together to make it longer, which I think is really interesting too. So going into one of our more unique shaped scrapbooks. This one is very heavy. Okay, so this was donated by the Shaker Heights Fire Department in 2008. But if you can see at the bottom, it's from 1959. It's a scrapbook to commemorate their fire. What word am I looking for? Let's see. Fire prevention, that's what I was looking for. Fire prevention campaign in 1959. So they compiled this. As I said, it is very heavy, it's very thick. So I'm not gonna try to lifted up, but you might have seen this is how it opens, which is kind of cool. It turns like that. So there are a number of photographs in pockets throughout it. There's also just kind of some more technical information, like this is kind of a list of going from the mayor to the chief division of fire, going down a number of letters and meeting minutes. But I think this is, we've actually received a lot of donations from the fire department over the years, which is really great. But I think that this is really cool. Everything is so well labeled, like almost every page, if not every page, is has a label and a caption at the bottom. So as I said, a lot of letters, but there are some photographs too. And one of my favorite pages, let's see if I can find it. It's kind of hard to see, but they had fire prevention demonstrations, and they released, like booklets and stuff on fire prevention. But they also had a fire prevention parade. And I know that that's hard to see. As I said, this book is particularly heavy and I don't want to risk dropping it at all. But I just think it's really fun to see. There are people wearing dog masks, Dalmatian masks in one. But again, this was 1959. And we actually have a couple of scrapbooks, if I remember correctly, from the fire department, according to our records, but they are not included on the scrapbook. They're not included in the scrapbook inventory. So I can't say for sure off the top of my head, but they have donated quite a bit over the years. And as I just think this one's cool in terms of how it's shaped. This is definitely the most unique one we have because of its shape. And then we have this one, which has to be, I would guess, maybe the oldest scrapbook in our collection. Some of them have older material within them, but in terms of actual creation, I'm guessing this is the oldest one. So you can see it's not in its best shape. It definitely came across some water or moisture at some point. It has some severe warping, but this book is basically, I'm going to try to be very careful with this because this one is very delicate. It's essentially collages of the Exponent, which was a Chagrin Falls weekly paper that ran from 1874 to 1964. So it's interesting to me because I showed you, like, for example, that Van Swearingen scrapbook that was clippings placed in an album, but this is just, it's collaged. And I think it's very interesting because it seems kind of random to me. Like, I don't know, did they just cut out images that, I'm going to turn this so you can kind of see, did they just cut out images that they were interested in? Did they mean something to them? Unlike the Van Swearingen scrapbook, where it's obvious that those were cut because they had to do with the Van Swearingen brothers, this one is very much just a mixture of stuff. And there isn't a clear date of when this was created, but there are mentions of Presidents Benjamin Harrison and William McKinley. So we know that it was created in the 1890s. And I think one of the newspapers on one of the pages does say, I think, like 1898 or something. But clearly it was kind of compiled over time. And most of the illustrations, because they're from newspapers, are black and white, but then every once in a while you get these color illustrations thrown in there. And I personally like this. Again, I went to art school, so this kind of reminds me of a lot of collage work in art history. And I personally consider this a work of art. I think that it's wonderful and it's really interesting. As I said, not knowing, there's Harrison, kind of guessing like why these people, or why the person who compiled it thought that these were important, or was it a visual thing? They thought that there was a nice illustration or a funny cartoon. It's interesting too to me, like on some of the pages, there are some Hindu gods that are cut out and added to the scrapbook. But it's upside down, but it mentions Chagrin Falls right there. So as I said, this is definitely I'm pretty sure the oldest scrapbook in terms of the entire scrapbook was created in the late 1800s, where some of the other scrapbooks contain information or material from earlier than that, but they were compiled later. So trying to stay aware of the time, but the last one that I'm going to show you, another big one, if there's anything you can get from this talk, is that we have a lot of very large scrapbooks. Sometimes it's hard to store them. So this scrapbook, you can see, it is huge. And this was compiled by Albert Pickford, who was a member of the Shaker Lakes Canoe Club. And we actually have some photos that are in the current exhibit. Let me share my screen again. See if I can find it. So all of our digital exhibits are on our page or on our website. So the current exhibit under the Shaker Heights section and in our physical exhibit as well includes some photographs from the Shaker Lakes Canoe Club. And these were framed. We came across them and had no idea where they were from. There was no context whatsoever. We didn't know, were they donated framed? Did they come from a collection that was donated? We honestly didn't know. We also have some trophies, but the photographs, are very cool, but we didn't know where they were from. And when we were searching our archives, we found this large scrapbook kind of buried under some photographs. And as we were going through it, we realized that some of those photographs, if not all of them, probably came from the scrapbook. So unfortunately, the reality of trying to maintain something like this over time is that photographs become loose. You can see them loose here. There should be a photograph here, but we're not quite sure what goes there. Here's another section. There are a lot of pages that have photo corners, but then no photo or document in them. But this is it's such a great record. It's kind of hard to see, but this is a list of names and addresses. They have the officers. There are a number of these that have officers. So this is from 1921, but it just kind of documents the history, not even necessarily the history in terms of we were founded in this, year or whatever, but the activities of the canoe club. And it feels very personal. That's what I like about it. It's people having fun. It's people going out on the lake or traveling. And so here's another page that should have 3 more images, but only has 1 right now. Some dapper gentlemen there. So I think that this scrapbook is awesome. And so once we came across this, I became really excited to do an exhibit on this. So you are the first to find out that our summer exhibit right now, we are planning on focusing on the canoe club, kind of building off of this scrapbook. We are also planning on talking with Jack Allman. I don't know if you recognize that name at all. He actually had an oral history that's available online. I will include the link to that in the email tomorrow or Tuesday. But we are planning on talking with him about the scrapbook, seeing if he has any memories of it that he can provide a little more context. But we also want to expand beyond the canoe club, which existed from 1908 to the 1970s, and also talk about Lower Lake and Friends of the Lower Lake and what they are currently doing to preserve that area, because the canoe club's boathouse doesn't exist anymore. The only thing that exists is the concrete foundation, which was excavated by Friends of the Lower Lake And so I think it's a really interesting transition of history of going from the canoe club, these young men that were trying to have fun on the lake, and now transitioning into good stewardship of this land, and what people in the community are now doing to care for it, and kind of carry on the legacy of the love for this lake and this area. So as I said, unfortunately, we don't actually know much about the scrapbook. It was given a call number at some point, like you could see it on the spine, but I haven't been able to find any records of who donated it. I'm guessing Albert Pickford created it because his name's on the cover, but I don't know if he donated it. I'm not sure when it was donated. So we do have to do a bit more digging, but it is still it's a great resource. It's so much fun to look through. And I'm really excited to highlight this and the work of Friends of the Lower Lake and people in the community who, are still out there canoeing and still out there enjoying the activities, even though the canoe club doesn't exist anymore. So I know that was a lot of information in a short amount of time. As I said, this is just a fraction of what we have. We have so much more. We have a number of scrapbooks that unfortunately they're deteriorating. The reality of scrapbooking is that until relatively recently, scrapbooks were not made, with acid-free paper. You saw the one that had just a bunch of clippings in it, or a couple with just clippings in it. There were a lot of materials that were used that do not stand up well to the test of time. And so paper that is very, we call it pulpy. So paper that had like newsprint, it yellows very quickly. It becomes brittle very quickly. So we do have a couple of scrapbooks that are literally falling apart. And I did not show those to you because I do not want to contribute any more to them falling apart by simply moving them. In a perfect world, we would have all of these digitized, but that takes time, money, resources. And so it is a goal of mine to eventually have these digitized, possibly writing some grants. If anyone is interested in maybe sponsoring, digitization of a specific scrapbook, like if there's a topic that you're really interested in, you can reach out to me. My email is director@shakerhistory.org. So if you have any questions or comments, feel free to send me an email. A lot of times we kind of work from home most of the time now. So email's usually better to get a hold of me than calling the museum. But as I said, we would love to have these digitized. The Lewis Baus scrapbook clearly took priority because of what a special resource it is. But so many of these other scrapbooks, I think having them digitized and available for anyone would be amazing, an amazing research reference for historians or for even students, local students in the area. So just to wrap up, if anyone needs to go to get ready for the Browns game, you're welcome to, but I'm just gonna go over some of our upcoming events that are listed on our website so you know what to look forward to. So let's see, let's go back to the website. So under programs and events, that's where we try to list everything in a timely manner. So we currently have our winter quarterly competition going on right now. Anyone is able to participate. We generally, we just started these competitions last summer, and it was a coloring contest. We had a number of kids participate. It was really fun. But this one is, we just want people to record a short 10-second scene of what Shaker Heights in winter means to you. So is that building a snowman? Is that going sledding? Is it a beautiful snowy scene over the lake? We really want people to kind of share that with us so we can save those and use that as a historical reference in the future. So if you're interested in participating, there are instructions on our website. This is the talk that you are attending right now, so we will be deleting that. Next Saturday, we have a virtual webinar or workshop on digitizing your collections. So it is led by two members of the Ohio History Service Corps. They led a virtual preservation workshop for us in November, and that was on how to care for your physical objects. So this webinar is going to be on how do you digitize your objects, how do you digitize your collection, family photos, and then how do you maintain that? Because one of the hardest things is, even if you digitize everything, well, what do you do with it once it's digitized? But you know, I think a lot of us, myself especially, I've been looking at a lot of digital photos during COVID because I'm not seeing friends, I'm not seeing family as much, and those digital memories are what I have to refer to. And so I think this is really timely to kind of help people get started on their own digital collections, so you can also share photographs with your friends and family. And next, or the Wednesday after that, so January 27th, Allison, our educator, will be doing her 3rd episode of Educator's Corner. And she will be talking about historic recipes. And, you know, everyone kind of has those old family recipes sitting around, and sometimes they're not that clear. Like, it'll just say a medium oven. What does that mean? You know, because nowadays we are so fine-tuned in terms of temperature and all the stuff you can do in your kitchen these days. So she's going to kind of dive into that, as well as some recipes that we have in our collection and some books as well. So that is at noon on our Facebook page. But I do want to note, I'll go to it after this, that all of our videos are being recorded and we are uploading them to our YouTube page. So if you ever miss a talk, you can easily go to our YouTube page and rewatch anything. A number of them are also on our Facebook page, but I know some people don't like using Facebook, completely fine. They're also on our YouTube page. And then the last event for January is our 2021 annual meeting. So again, this is going to be virtual. It's our first virtual meeting, just to be safe. It will start at 3. Traditionally, we kind of book 3 to 5, and I don't think it's going to go that long this time, just because by the nature of things, we don't have cookies and coffee and everything to hand out to you. So it starts at 3. It will be through Zoom, and you'll just be able to hear an overview from me of what we accomplished in the past year, as well as a special talk by Kara O'Donnell, who is the new principal planner for the city of Shaker Heights. Prior to this, she worked in Cleveland Heights for 25 years. So she kind of has a unique perspective of kind of both the preservation from both of those communities and tying them together, which I think is really cool. So the annual meeting is free, but just to kind of control who's able to attend and make sure everything is done in an organized manner, we are requiring that people register. So there is a link at the bottom of the page to register. It'll take you to a page that looks like this, and you just put in your name and email address, so that way we don't have anyone. I don't know if you've heard, there are people who kind of try to disrupt Zoom meetings, and we're trying to avoid that. So it is capped at 100 attendees just because of our Zoom plan. It does cost money to add more. So unfortunately, it's 100 attendees right now, but it's virtual. You can join in your pajamas and no one will ever know. So I hope that you attend for that. So the last thing, as I mentioned, all of these are on our YouTube page. So there is a link on our programs and events page, but it's also at the bottom. This icon takes you to our YouTube page. And all of the videos that we have created are uploaded there, other than my director's talks, because those are members only. Those are unlisted, which means they aren't public. So if, as I said, we do send the links out, but if you ever lose the link and you're like, oh, I really wanted to watch the one on collections or scrapbooks again, just send me an email and I can easily send you the link to the video. But all of our public videos that have aired on either Instagram or Facebook Live are available on our YouTube page, along with some workshops and some talks that have been given in the past. And we're going to try to keep this up and continually add to our YouTube page, so it's as accessible as possible. I know sometimes when we do programming in the middle of the day, it can be hard for people who work. So we just want to make sure that, as I said, that they're as accessible as possible and that more people can share with that. So that's all for me. I don't see any questions. Thank you, John. Yeah, this was a fun presentation. It was really hard to pick. I went over, I think, 11 scrapbooks, and that was narrowed down. Like, I had even more than that originally chosen. And I'm like, oh no, once Once Dick Park pointed out to me that the Browns game starts at 3, I kind of forgot about that. I'm like, I can't talk about as many as I wanted to. But if you ever, once we reopen our doors, if you ever want to come and look through them, send me an email. I'm happy to accommodate because we really do have some cool scrapbooks and resources here. So if there are no other questions, I'm going to end the meeting now. So thank you for coming. And I will be sending the link tomorrow or Tuesday. So you can look forward to that along with some better photos of the photos I was trying to show you during this meeting. So thank you for coming. Bye.